Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Mimi Tempestt, and I want to welcome Ashley Marie. Is it Lagrange or Lagrange?
Lagrange.
Lagrange to the second episode, actually, of season three of Black.Queer.Alive. Hi, Ashley.
Hello.
Hey, how are you? How you doing? What's going on? Is it snowing out there? You're in New York, right?
Yeah, so we had a snowstorm yesterday into today and it
Mhm.
stopped around like 1. So it was just that like beautiful bright like yellow light.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just kind of chilly now and I've been indoors all day. So yeah, but I love the snow. So I'm just like enjoying the view.
Yeah, I'm complete. It's not even. I mean, it's kind of like warm out here right now. I'm in Oakland, and it's like super sunny. It rained last night, but for the most part, it's like it's not anywhere near snowing, so we're good. All right, let's jump into it. Um, tell me your age, occupation, or what you're passionate about, and what motivates you.
Yeah, so funny enough, tomorrow's my birthday. So
Happy
this
birthday, Sagittarius.
Thank you. Fire sign. My whole chart is fire, so I just feel like just love the fire. Um, so today's my last day of being 23. Tomorrow I turn 24. And in terms of occupation, I'm actually a therapist. I am pre-licensed, so I'm a pre-licensed therapist for the LGBT community. Prior to this, I was gonna be a school counselor, and
Wow.
I'm a certified school counselor because youth work is like my passion. Um, but because of the times that we're living in, I was like, I first of all don't want to adjust to like virtual schooling, and also I think it took away the like component that I really wanted, which was like the connection between the kids and knowing that like for a lot of youth, home is not a safe space.
Mhm.
So I felt like the work that we would be doing wouldn't even really be the work that I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, how can I still do something with the degree that I got? And so I started doing mental health therapy. I started doing like grassroots work with the QT BIPOC community. So I basically had a really swift transition that I didn't know jack shit about. I had to like go ask people like SOS, what do I do? Because I really thought I was gonna be a school counselor. And yeah, now I'm a LGBT therapist. So I do things based on like body image, talk about sex, talk about boundaries, talk about communication. Yeah.
What's been, I mean, what's that experience been like? I've always been community based and, community organized. So I've always dealt with, queer, Black folks in I guess you could see within the confines of like a party scene or like a community, uh like in where we get together and we create joy and life for each other. So what's that experience been like in a more professional setting, um working under therapy?
Yeah. So I am not the conventional student that most programs would want. I
Mhm.
actually had a lot of conflict in my graduate school experience.
Mhm.
Like these people were trying to kick me out, kind of conflict,
Whoa.
because I openly talked about race and gender. I'm non-binary, so a lot of the time I would bring up trans issues. I'm I identify as a Black Dominican, so I would bring up race a lot.
Mhm.
And obviously, it is a privilege to be in higher education, even though I was out there with loans. But I was in an all white space and I went to grad school in Philadelphia, which is a very Black city.
Mhm.
So I thought I was going to end up in a really Black program, only to end up being one of 4 people of color.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah. So I, from the jump, have been aware of like the systems that therapy is a part of and like the things that they reiterate and the way that they mirror like the carceral system and like just white supremacy in general. So from the jump I was just like, I'm going to do therapy how I want to do it.
Mhm.
So I'm very open about the fact that like I myself am mentally ill. I'm very open about my identities. I'm very open just about my experience, obviously not trying to take the time away from clients, but like letting them know like I'm a real human being and you're sitting across me because we have some sort of like relatability. Um, So yeah, for me, I've always made it a space of like, let's be our most authentic selves, which also means I'm gonna be my most authentic self. So I talk how I talk. I use my slang the way that I use it. I curse when I want to. Like,
Yeah.
I think a big thing is that when you're in like the preparation stage of like a profession like this, they tell you, all these concepts of professionality and all that bullshit. And from the jump, I was like, I don't care to be professional by your standards. Like, I know the quality of my work and the quality of my care,
Mhm.
and people will come back to me because they feel that too. So I don't feel the need to like be presentable to these academics.
Yeah, respectable. I love what you're saying because it's weird because in undergrad, I was like, in undergrad, I just like did whatever the fuck I wanted. Like I went to school during the day and then I was like this other person at night. I was like a weird superhero. Then when I went to get my master's, it was just predominantly people, I worked with predominantly people of color. So like my whole conceptualization of professionality didn't have to contend constantly with, whiteness. We talked a lot about it, but how we perform, or just not perform, but just we're in space with each other, never dealt with that. But I'm finding in my PhD program, they're trying to figure me out. Like I find them trying to figure me out. So I feel you in that because there's a box that they try to contain specifically black queer bodies, black femme presenting or just queer non-binary bodies. Um, how did you take care of yourself during that time? Like
Well,
what were your methods?
yeah, it was a really rough transition. So I went to grad school right after undergrad because I've known for a couple years that I wanted to do some sort of mental health work.
Mm,
I fucking hate admin stuff. Like I can't do paperwork and stuff, even though as a therapist I do have to do some paperwork. I knew that like I wanted that one-to-one like interpersonal connection. So to me, I was like, of course I want to be a therapist or a school counselor, something that allows me to have that connection. Um, and so for me, I think it's been like an easier path because I knew from the beginning. And honestly, that was because as when I was younger, I had to fight to go to therapy. Like culturally, that was like, what do you mean? Are you not well? Like, but not well in a way that we should be embarrassed about. So I really had to advocate for myself, and I'm an only child. So it was like I didn't have anyone to confide in with that. I really had to like sit with myself and be like, is this a fight that I'm willing to have? And then I was sent to therapists that I didn't like. And I was like, yo, this is whack as fuck. Like, this shit sucks. Like, I'm gonna keep going. But so yeah, through college, I still was trying like counseling and all that stuff. And so when I finally got to grad school, I had already been really burnt out because my undergrad experience was traumatizing because
mm,
I went to college in the middle of a little town in Wisconsin.
mm.
Yeah, like wildness, especially
Originally from
down
New
to,
York, like from the East Coast.
yeah, from
Okay.
New York to a tiny town in Wisconsin that used to be a sundown town,
Oh
like
no.
one of those towns.
Yeah.
So when it was time for me to go to grad school, I was like, yo, I have so much shit to heal. I have so much shit to process. So I found myself a Black trauma informed therapist,
Mm,
and I absolutely adore her. And I just like really got into my crafts that I like. So like I'm a collage artist,
mm,
which I would have never called myself an artist a couple years ago, but I was like, this is just a hobby. So really becoming one with my craft. And then also, I think it was just really helpful that I enjoyed the work. Like, I enjoyed going into my internship site and like seeing kids. And yeah, there was again, the systems that like were thrown into my face that I was like, damn, like, I'm really joining this profession. But it was like, once I was with the students, I was like, this is why I'm doing this.
I love
So
that.
that definitely, that plus my therapist, hands down, and my friends, my amazing, amazing friends, being there to listen to all the shit that I was going through, um, that definitely helped.
I'm gonna ask. Thank you for that answer. I'm gonna ask one more question around the topic of therapy. So for people who are Black and queer and who are looking for therapists, but I think the culture of mental health in America and just medicine, anything regarding to health in America has, systematically been hard for us to access. For those who are seeking mental health support, what would you suggest would be the first step for us, and how should we go about approaching seeking the help that we need?
Mhm. That's a great question. I obviously think it depends on the person's comfort level because some people are really okay with having community and like reaching out to community, but obviously being cognizant of like not expecting people with similar identities and struggles to do that labor for you. And like, this whole, I'm really big on bringing up like emptying your cup and filling your cup. And so like, making sure that you have people you can talk to within your space, but also being aware of like how often you're talking, what the topic is. Um, and I think starting there and seeing like what support is for you, because that's also what I think a lot of my therapeutic approach is like, I want you to have community. I want you to have someone for when I'm not here. Because there's also people that like, they just wait to talk to their therapist at this specific time. And I'm like, no, I also want you to have loving, nurturing relationships. And being a therapist honestly taught me that a lot of people don't have that. Like, a
Mhm.
lot of people don't have like loving friendships, and then people have issues with biological family. And so starting in that sphere, but if someone is seeking like professional help, I think because of the state of the world, a lot of practices have been doing amazing initiatives and like fundraising. And I know like for me, um my like self-pay scale is pretty low because I'm just there to like really provide the support. And so finding what maybe local initiatives are happening. So like I in Philadelphia did a initiative where I gave 8 free sessions to Black identified folks. And then after that, like we would talk about what it is within their means to continue working with each other, but at least giving them that space in the beginning, and
Mhm.
at least giving them the conversations to open up to their feelings. Because also I think a big thing in working with like the BIPOC, QT BIPOC community was a lot of people knew that therapy was a thing, but they didn't know what the fuck it looked like. Like
Mm.
people show up and they're like, what do I do here? What's too much information? What's not enough information? Can I tell you this? Am I legally going to face consequence? So really just talking to them about like, what is therapy? What do you want therapy to be? And like, why is it necessary to just at least have any space, even if it isn't with me, to just be like open and radically vulnerable with yourself.
Radically vulnerable. I like that. Mm. And it's funny, when I read your response, I was like, this is a very vulnerable response. I'm not, it's not typical. Um, I love that radical vulnerability. I'm gonna write that. I'm gonna write that down somewhere.
That's
Um,
my go-to phrase. Like for years, I think that is also what has allowed me to make this space for people is like I used to be a kid that didn't like to talk about their feelings but was bursting at the seams with feelings. And
mm,
it wasn't I didn't grow up in a household where it was like normal to talk about those things,
mm,
to really get affection or anything like that. And so I just felt really weird all the time. And as I got older and I was really blessed to meet some really amazing friends, I realized that like the vulnerability that we were experiencing wasn't just like, I'm letting you know I'm sad, but I'm like giving you these details that in some capacities they can be oversharing. But the way that we're holding space for each other and the way that we're also being aware of like, that's too much information, but I still want to hear about the topic. Like it was just like a really radical approach to being vulnerable. And so I think honestly from like ever since I've been in college, like I've had like radical vulnerability in my Instagram bio. Like
mm.
radical vulnerability is something that I try to practice every single day of my life.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. We're gonna pivot a bit. You said that you're non-binary, so what are your pronouns for like official pronouns?
Yeah, I use they them pronouns.
Cool, cool. And if you feel comfortable expressing this, what is your gender expression? Oh, we already said that. But what do you sexually identify? That's the
Yeah. So whenever it comes to like labeling myself, I always say that I am a um fat black Dominican non-binary femme. Um, I would say that like sexual orientation, I identify as lesbian. So yeah, a non-binary lesbian.
nice. Okay, I like that. Where do you find home?
Yeah. Ooh, I think it kind of touches onto the piece of like radical vulnerability for me, which is I think for me, home has always had a sense of familiarity. So this sense of like understanding, this sense of I kind of understand your struggle or understand where you're coming from, even if parts of our identities make the way that we got to this page different.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that for me, finding home is a sense of like knowing that that familiarity exists, and knowing that my vulnerability is welcome. Because I think that for a long time, I put all my eggs in a basket. And then I was like, why is this not working? Why is this connection not working? Why is this friendship not working? But realized that like they just didn't get me. And I was trying to make people get me rather than understanding myself and then
Mhm.
displaying that authentically and just like seeing who
Grad
it connects with.
you. Mhm.
Yeah. So I think just this general sense of like who can accept my vulnerability and not see it as too much, and who can also be okay when I'm not as open and not see it as like not being enough.
Mhm.
I think that having that sense of like flexibility feels like home for me because a lot of the people in my life have known me um when I've been bursting at the seams with feelings, but also have been in this neutral state of just like processing and haven't asked me to default back to, being over emotional or being oversharing or whatever it is. Um so for me it's balance. For me it's people taking me as I present myself and meeting me where I'm at versus where I was and where they think I should be.
The home feels so malleable. It's not
Mhm.
like a stasis. It's ever growing, ever flowing, ever present. I like that. I would say it's one of the most interesting answers to that question that I've heard. I like that a lot. In your journey, I mean, through being a collage artist, um, and in your journey becoming a therapist, what are you searching for? If you're searching for anything at all.
Yeah. That question is like super hard. And then I realized like it's not hard at all.
Yes.
But I think like, right, like there are so many things in the world that we're searching for, right? Like, I don't know, financial stability, all these other things, right? Like, but for me, I am always looking for more embracing of ugly.
Ooh.
I really want to exist in a world where desirability is not so powerful as it is. And
Mhm.
I think of that in a multitude of ways. I think of it as like ugly as political, ugly as social, ugly as emotional. Um, Thinking about what the experience of being mentally ill is like and how that's ugly to people and the way that you show up is ugly, even the way that you live when you're mentally ill, right? Like there are days where maybe a person doesn't want to shower for days on end and like people's commentary on that or like the way people keep their space. Then also thinking like physically what it's like to be fat and grow up in a culture that has been, mirrors white supremacist values of like a certain body shape and certain features and things like that. Um, and also just like I think in general, I've just always felt ugly. Like I've just always felt ugly. I've struggled with the eating disorder in high school. Um, and honestly, like obviously there was like a multitude of things that brought that to be, but one of the biggest things for me was like this constant race to be beautiful. Like how quick can I become beautiful, which to me felt like, harmful behavior was the answer. But I always thought that if I became beautiful, then life would be easier, that I would have more opportunities, that I would have more friends, that I would have more access, that I would also enjoy things more, right? Like I thought that if I had more, that I would feel more
Mm.
because all that I was feeling was just like emptiness and numbness and then like these negative feelings. So
Mm.
yeah,
Do
I
you
feel like
remember? Because it's so interesting. I mean, I don't know if this validates or I mean, I'm not interested in validating or invalidating your response. That's like I try to make sure I do that when I do these interviews. But I think you're so beautiful. So it's very interesting how that conceptualization exists for you. When did that start? Like this whole notion of ugliness or um, reappropriating ugliness. Uh, Two questions. This is where I'm going. When did you identify ugly like as a concept in your mind? And then
Mhm.
two, when did you begin reappropriating the notion of ugliness to overcome that initial um that initial concept, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that 100% makes sense.
Okay.
Um, so for me, honestly, this is one of my earliest memories, which is why I think ugly has been such a big topic for me, which is I distinctly remember in preschool
Mm,
at a little round table. Like I remember I was like in a dress and everything, and it was like me and another kid next to each other, and the teacher was like handing out boxes of crayons for like arts and craft time, and she
mhm.
put the box between us and said, "Okay, don't forget to share the box of crayons." And the little boy next to me snatched the box and said, "I don't want to share with you. You're ugly."
Oh.
And me just being like, "What?" and really thinking like, because this person thinks I'm ugly, they don't want to share with me, which
That
means
young of an age, I'm sorry to cut you off, that young of an age,
yeah,
you okay. Wow.
yeah, like I was just like, oh, so like I don't deserve things because I'm ugly.
Mm.
And that kind of continued on to elementary school, getting bullied for being fat,
Mhm.
um, being that kid that was like smart and kind of popular. Like I was always friends. I conveniently was always friends with like the really pretty popular girl. And so I was the fat friend, right? The fat best friend. And in elementary school, I remember like I got bullied in a way that this boy that I had like had found out that I liked him and like did this whole like secret admirer thing only to like laugh in my face in front of the whole class.
Oh my God.
And
Mhm.
that only continued in my life of like moments of like fat phobia. And in middle school, that was the first space ever where I was around white people. I live in Queens, New York. Like I'm in a predominantly brown area. I live in a really big Latino area. And so a lot of the kids I went to school with were black and brown and Asian. And so um, it wasn't until middle school that I was around white people. And then I would hear all the white kids, you know, make all these microaggressive comments and basically call black girls ugly and like, make all of these like over sexualized comments about the Latina girls. And so I was in this weird space of like ingesting all of that and then also remembering these moments where I was bullied essentially, and I just really internalized that. And even the things that I knew were out of my control, like I it's hereditary for me to have really like a lot of stretch marks. I get it from my father's side. Even my half brother, who's stick thin, like is covered in them. And I remember in the 4th grade, I went to the hospital with appendicitis, so I missed the end of the school year, and I went to go like collect my things, and I was wearing a tank top because it was like June, and all the kids were like, oh my god, like were you in a fire? Why do your arms look like that? Like what happened to you? And
Mm.
like that being like such a shameful experience where I wanted to like cover myself, and like for years I would not wear tank tops anymore. It's like the fact that I can be here in a tank top is huge. And like yeah, just that, all of those experiences really made me convinced that I was ugly, like 100%, to the point where like it wasn't just about my physical, but I thought like internally I was ugly too. Like if these people are making such a big deal about my outside, then my inside must not even be good enough.
Damn.
Yeah.
Being what's been your experience of being Afro Latina or Afro Latinx?
Um it's been a ride. Been a ride, right? Like I'm Dominican, like let's like that in itself, right? The Dominican community. Um and not really having that conversation. My mom's nickname was Negra and my dad's nickname is Moreno, but nobody ever called ourselves Black. And because I came from a super diverse family in terms of like hair texture, skin tone, I never identified myself as Black because I was like, my whole family's not Black, so how does that make sense?
When
Uh,
did you make that transition into saying like, oh no, I am Black, like this is a part of this?
yeah, it took a couple Black femmes in college being like, bitch, you're Black. And me being like, oh, but I have African ancestry. And they're like, bitch, you're Black. And I was like, but I have African ancestry and like, da da da. And really coming to terms with like where I got my last name, right? Like a French last name, bitch, that's a colonizer's last name, right? Like someone did something to someone in my family line, and that's how we got that last name. Um, and also I think just like really em- really like remembering my experiences, and like I said, middle school was a really pivotal moment because that was the first time where I was around white people, and clearly to all these white people I was Black.
Mm,
But then when I was around like the African American students, I was like, but I'm not this kind of Black, but I'm, but then all the other Latinas, like nobody ever groups me with them. So like, what is that about? So it wasn't until college, after, people tirelessly being like, Ashley, get your shit together, and me actually sitting down and like thinking about the fact that like Dominicans don't need to have their whole family looking Black to be Black.
mhm,
And especially on my mother's side, my grandmother, Black, 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 like without a doubt. And I think it wasn't until my mom shared the story of like my grandparents' love story, which I was like, that's kind of problematic,
mhm.
um, that I was like, she faced anti-Blackness. And that's what I guess I've been experiencing. And I think it's what also added to that was that I had been dating a white person, and my coming to gayness story is really a lot,
Oh, we
but
go get to that
yeah, basically I met someone on tumblr.com and they were white and they lived in the Midwest,
one.
and
Uh-huh.
we had a long distance relationship. And yes,
Okay.
and the first time I met their mom was on FaceTime. And the first thing she said to me, and again, at this point, I was a senior in college, so I hadn't even been in that like mindset of I am Black. The very first thing this white lady said to me was, "Oh, his his grandfather would be turning in his grave if he knew he was dating a Black girl."
Oh man, fuck that
And
bitch.
I was just like, one, because I was like, why the fuck would you open the conversation like that? And two, like, I'm not Black. And then I said something about being Dominican, and she was like, oh, you're so exotic. That's beautiful.
Oh,
So all of these pieces and points of me being like,
mm,
bro, everyone is saying you're Black. You're fucking Black. And then again, hearing my grandparents' love story and being like, yeah, I did experience things that my grandmother did. Obviously, not the same because she was way darker than me and colorism exists.
mm.
But yeah, I had to connect all those many dots. And here I am.
Wh- how do you converse now with your parents about your Blackness?
My mom is gung ho for it. I've been like, I'm learning, you're learning, honey. So like we'll watch like IG lives together. Like I love Jewel the Gem. Jewel the Gem is like Haitian.
Okay.
Um and so we'll like watch like Jewel's lives together and we'll have conversations. I had her like sit in on this like, so the CUNY, like the Community University of New York has like a really big like Dominican
Like
like
popular.
studies.
Oh, stop
Yeah,
studies
yeah,
department. Mhm.
yeah. So I've like watched academic things and like had her sit with me and we'll have conversations. And I mean, like I knew that they had acknowledged these things about themselves because their nicknames.
Mhm.
Um, but I think in terms of like thinking of what that means for them in like a societal standpoint, it wasn't until I started having those conversations.
Mhm.
And I did come out being kind of like that liberal arts brat in the beginning of like, oh my God, how do you not know this? Like, we need to have these conversations. But then
Yeah.
that's not fucking effective. And like, thinking about all of the like black femmes that tried to like tell me about myself and being like, they didn't curse you out, Ashley. So like, why are you, feeling heated? Like, calm yourself down and just taking my time, because if it was like difficult for me to process by the age of like 19, 20, for me to speak to someone in like their 50s about it, like,
Yeah, it's like a whole other, that's like their whole life reconstructed, or reimagined, really.
and now my mom is all for it. Like, she calls out anti-blackness, and we'll like
Yay.
watch things and she'll be like, well, that wasn't very like nice, like that. She'll be able to like say like, oh, like that was, fat phobia, or like that was anti-black.
Yes.
I'm like, I love this
Oh,
critical analysis
mom.
of the shows we're watching.
I love that.
Yeah.
Growing up though, is there any, did you see yourself in any media or any stories?
Definitely not.
Mhm.
Um, I think honestly, when I think of representation, the very first I always say that the first identity that was put on me was fat, because that's what people saw. But the first identity that I gave to myself was mentally ill, like being mentally ill,
Mhm.
because it impacted how different I was from everyone around me. It
Mhm.
impacted how different I was from my cousins, from my like classmates, even just like, I don't know, watching things like Disney Channel and being like, why are all these people happy? Like, I don't feel this. Like, what is going on? Um, so for me, one of the biggest like points of connections was music. And I know that this answer probably sounds so strange,
It's
but
okay.
honestly, the first person that I really resonated with and like was so obsessed with was Amy Winehouse. Like, hearing Amy Winehouse's music and hearing the like pain and the sadness and the reflection and like the love, and a lot of my anger at that time was rooted towards my father and just like men. And so like hearing the way that she talked about like the anger and sadness of loving men that kept doing her wrong, like Amy Winehouse was that was my go-to, to the point where like I'm super introverted. So in middle school I auditioned for a school play, like a musical, and I sang Amy Winehouse. So my chorus teacher for the next 3 years was like, "Okay, little Amy Winehouse."
Which song did you sing for your audition?
Oh my God. Why did I sing You Know I'm No Good?
Oh my god, I was listening to that 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Amy, I appreciate your answer, and I also, I mean, I think Amy Winehouse is one of the best songwriters that I've ever encountered in my life. I mean, if I could write a song as powerful as Amy at any point in my life, that's a fucking blessing. But I mean, Amy has a way of seeing the world not from with the cloud, above her head, but being that very damn cloud. Like that's just, and there's like a rawness, like a guttural essence to it, that how she sings it and why she's singing it. It's why she's singing it is so true. It's just this is
Yeah.
I appreciate that answer. All right, man. Yeah, Amy
Yeah.
Winehouse, man.
Ugh, miss her
I like,
because
and I remember, when she passed. I remember about 2 years before she passed. I was like, we're gonna kill this woman. We're gonna kill this
exactly.
woman because
Yeah.
we want her essence, but we don't want to help her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as if we are dependent upon her mental illness to get that very thing that we need to, like, to have our own exodus of our feelings.
Yeah.
Um, why I think my question now is, and it's more of a curiosity, is why mentally ill? Like, some people say disabled or mentally, there's so many words that people use these days, um or unhealthy, but why that phrase ill? Because I feel like illness is implicative of there being like a damage that's irreversible. So why that specific language?
Yeah, so I'm becoming more comfortable using the term neurodivergent.
Okay,
Um,
that gets that word as well.
yeah.
Mhm.
But I say mentally ill to honor the language that I used at that time.
Okay.
Like that's what it felt like. Like I felt like I was sick. I felt like I was so sick I couldn't function, right? Like the fogginess in my head kind of felt like a head cold, but a head cold every single day of my life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and honestly, it hasn't been until this year where I've started to become comfortable with like realizing that for me, my neurodivergence is a disability.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like continuously unlearning what we think is disability in this world and unlearning ableism, and redefining that for ourselves in a way that's like true to the human experience and not again reflective of like white supremacist
Mm-hmm.
pillars of like wellness. um but yeah, for me it was like the way that I perceived it when I was younger was there's something wrong with me, and it also felt like a sickness because I was internalizing and like ingesting all of these things that people were saying and doing to me, and that felt like the big cause of my sickness. And people, around me made it seem like I was always interpreting things wrong, that my perception was wrong. And so I was being too sensitive, especially as an only child. I was told, you're being a brat, you're spoiled, you just want attention. But it's like I am also really introverted. And so I was not the kind of kid to be like seeking attention through bad attention. So it felt even more like something's wrong with me, like I'm sick in some way. Um so yeah, that's why I would use that term, because that's the term that for the longest I felt really identified me.
How has your collages interpreted either your feelings or your identity? Um, what has that experience been like being a collage artist?
Yeah, so I started collaging at one of the roughest points in my life. I was in college, I was super duper depressed. And I basically I like to say that May through September is like my traumaversary.
Oh wow, that whole period. Okay.
So the timeline of events quickly is that my 3-year relationship ended really terribly. Um, and then it was like at the end of the school year, and then I went home, and then my godbrother suddenly passed. And
Mm,
then the very next day was the Pulse shooting, and I happened to be interning at the New York City LGBT Center. So when I showed up to work the next day, the SWAT team was our security. And so I was going through this breakup slash loss slash community impact.
yeah.
Um, and then the following year, my godmother passed. And both of their birthdays are in September. So my godbrother passed in June and my godmother passed in August. So that time period for me is just heavy. But when I was in college, to handle my grief, I was like, I need to get creative. Like, I need to not just be sitting up all these hours, just like crying and thinking. So I love thrifting. I've loved thrifting for years and like antiquing. And so there was a local thrift shop near my college, and I would just buy a bunch of picture books, and I would just spend hours like ripping up pictures and gluing things together. So when I started off, it was really just like aesthetic driven. It was like, let me make cute cards for my friends and like let me do things in my journal. So I like to do what I call radical journaling, where my journal is like my heart and soul. I write a lot in there. I try to paint in there. I collage in there. It's like my journals are usually like really big and filled to the brim.
Oh,
Um, so like making that like my physical place of process, also because I was recovering from my eating disorder and recovering from self-harm. So it felt good to like physically like rip things up and like, just use my hands. Um and I don't think it was until about the past year or so that I developed kind of a style. And so um I had my kind of a little off note, but I had my birth chart read this summer.
oh
And
wow. What did they tell you?
oh, they told me so much. It was beautiful, But one of the things that they told me was that like I'm secretly religious, which is
Wow.
so
Okay.
true. Because after losing my godmother and my godbrother, I really connected to altar work. So I like started creating altars wherever I lived, and really like sat there and took care of it. And so now in my art, I've found that I was really making these images that were reminiscent of like religious art. So like a lot of the bodies that I use, I usually put some sort of halo around them. And I realized that a lot of my figures that I use are women or women identified, or in my perspective, I'm just like, these are just femmes to me. But um so it wasn't until like I had that reading and then I looked at all my art and I was like, oh shit, all of these people have halos on them. Like all of these you know, images that feel like, like those like death cards that you get at funerals. They
Mhm.
kind of, all of my collages kind of felt like that.
Wow.
And so I realized that, yeah, I was kind of secretly religious. And I guess right now it's not a secret because I'm putting it out there,
Right.
but honoring my grief in that way and still honoring that like coping mechanism of using my hands and just like creating with it. And it wasn't until like I really made that point for myself that I like really started to like love my art. And now I can like sit with it framed next to me.
Did you grow up religious?
Um, no, not really. So I my mom never pushed anything on me, because her mother pushed it on her, and my mom was like, "Oh hell no." Like I feel like in the beginning, when I was identifying as like a young feminist, a lot of my feminist thoughts were from my mother because my mother was the youngest in her family.
Mhm.
She's the only one born in the US, so she was given a lot of responsibility, even though her siblings were a lot older than her. So she raised me to be like, don't take anyone's bullshit. Like, just
Mhm.
because you're young doesn't mean that they can do whatever they want. Doesn't mean they can talk to you however you want. So she just never pushed those things on me.
Mhm.
But I do have family members that were religious and didn't always have the best comments about me. Because I also was like outwardly emo. Like I would wear all black and like just fit the very like young emo hot topic look.
Yeah.
So for me, it like gave me this like adverseness to like religion, but then I always loved going to church because I loved the art. So like yes, I didn't want to be there, but when I did have to go for whatever occasion, I was like down for it because I was like, I could just look all around.
I'm gonna just pause this very quickly. All right, we're back. Um, wow. I think art reveals to us our soul, our inner workings, what we're really invested in, like subconsciously. So that's interesting that through your collaging, that's what came up for you. I'm gonna pivot a little bit. Um, and we you kind of answered the first question about realizing the first time you were black, but tell me about the first time you realized you were queer, or like yeah, because you've go ahead.
Yeah. I would identify as queer. Like I do identify as queer in general because I think that queerness doesn't just embody like my sexual orientation or gender identity, but like my life and the way that I live it and how it's so like against the norms or against the things that the people around me want to be norms.
Mhm.
Um but honestly, again, shout out to Tumblr, tumblr.com.
Oh yeah, please. I forgot about that. About meeting your first
Yeah. Well,
love.
I met the first girl that I liked off Tumblr, and then I met my first ever person that I dated off Tumblr as well. Which, yeah, Tumblr really was my awakening. But for me, it's ironic because in middle school I had been in love with my best friend, who was a boy, cisgendered male.
Mhm.
And when we were at the end of our 8th grade, he was, I don't even know how we got up to the conversation, but he looked at me and he's like, Ashley, you're gonna be a lesbian. And I was like, what? And he's like, I'm just like, I just feel it. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, like, what does he mean? I'm in love with him. I can't be a lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact, in high school, he bumped into me on the train with my girlfriend, and he's like, I knew it. I
Oh
knew
my
you were gonna be a
god.
lesbian. So I really did not anticipate that being a part of my identity. But looking back, it makes sense. I really liked really like feminine, effeminate looking boys. I just thought it was a part of the emo shit, honestly. I was like, ooh, tight pants and like long hair and this like really I really thought like that was just normal and that was just like my type of dude that I liked. But then I got on Tumblr because my other middle school best friend,
Mhm.
her sisters were older and like putting her on to hella shit, and so she put me on, and I was like, yo, this is it. And I started following people who were like open about their sexuality, but I never like took it as like making me question mine. And I followed people who were lesbians and like lesbian couples, but I didn't just follow them, so it again didn't feel like anything. But it wasn't until I followed the person that I liked for the first time and like I looked at an image of them and then I had a dream about them. And
Oh,
I was like, "Oh, that's strange." And I like yeah, basically contacted them on it and they were coming to New York for the summer and they were like we should hang out. And I was like, "Oh, sure. Like, I think this person is so hot and beautiful, but like, that's just like the aesthetics." And then I met them and I like viscerally remember like craving them,
oh,
like
wow.
wanting to be with them, wanting to like touch them. Like, my journals, because I like to look back at my journals, I'm like, "Ooh, this is nasty." Like, I'm like, this is so weird. I don't want anyone to see the way I was writing about this person. But like, those are the feelings that I had. And I never had that for like cis men or cis boys at that time. Like, I used to feel so inadequate because one, I thought I was so ugly, but two, everyone around me was like making out, hooking up, dating. And I was still like virgin, never been kissed, whatever. And like boys had approached me, but I never liked them. And I was like, ew. But then I realized, oh, I did want attention, but it just wasn't from them.
Yeah.
And so I finally got that like feeling of like, because my friends would talk about like making out with boys, and I'm like, what is it about you that makes you want to kiss them? Like, I can't imagine that. And then I met this person, and I was just like daydreaming of kissing them all the time. And so, yeah, Tumblr.com.
What was that? Wow. Internet dating scares me. I have to do my shit in 3D. Like I have to vibe you out. But what is that experience like being queer and virtually dating, especially at such a young age? Yeah. What was that
Yeah,
like?
I met this person the summer after my sophomore year.
Mhm.
Um, and we basically spent the whole summer together and everything. Um, I think the reason that I liked virtual dating in term or virtual like pursuing
Yeah.
is that at this point people were so vulnerable on the internet, especially on Tumblr, right? Like people were
People.
putting I mean, I was putting everything out there. So it was nice to be able to really see a person for who they are, or at least what I could perceive from that, blog. Um, without having to have those conversations right away. So it was like they were being so vulnerable on the internet that I got to feel like I was getting to know them, which is, that there's the pros and cons, right? Because when people are they have platforms, they feel like people think they know them and then cross boundaries. But for me, that felt safer because I had felt so rejected that it was like nice to like read someone's thing and be like, oh, you're mentally ill too, like it won't be weird when I have a bad mood, or like, oh, you've had this bad experience, like I've had something like that. So now that I know when it's time for me to bring it up at one point, that we both will have had kind of a shared experience. So in a way, kind of like allowed this like weird emotional stalking, but that for me made me feel safe.
Okay. Um. Wow. I've never. I
Yeah.
know a lot of people that have dated online, but never done. Do I know any Tumblr folks? I don't think I do. I think you're my first. I know that happens, but I think you're my first person who I've ever talked to like explicitly about that. How long did that relationship last?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting experience. I liked the person that I met off. So they lived in Jersey and I lived in New York, and we spent time with each other. And then they were doing their own thing. So I started talking to someone else just as a friend. And
Mhm.
then one day they were like, let's FaceTime. And I was like, okay, that's not weird. Because again, I had been meeting people off the internet already because I was an only child and like younger than a lot of people in my family. So I started to develop feelings for this person, and we talked about it. And essentially, this other person was not available, but they liked me and they admitted it. And this other person was like, I like you, but I know I'm far. And I was like, this other person's not available. So I'm going to give it a try. So this
Mhm.
person was all the way in the Midwest. And I was like, fuck it, I'll try. Like, I've never felt these feelings before. All my friends talk about these things. Like, why am I going to deny myself that? Like, I deny myself so many things because of the way that I treat myself and the way that I harm myself due to my perception of myself. So, like, why not allow myself to have this? And yeah, me and that person ended up dating for 3 years.
Wow.
Did long distance for two, and then we were in person for a year, and then that ended terribly.
Okay, wow.
But yeah, 3 years.
What's your experience now dating as a fat non-binary femme?
Yeah, it's been absolutely terrible. Like, it's been such a it ki- it kind of felt like I was 15 all over again.
Mm,
So after that 3-year relationship ended, I was single for 3 years. Um, and it was because I had a lot to process. One being that that person was involved with someone else at the end of our relationship, and
like
that person
school
was,
children?
yeah, that person was like a skinny white girl who was blonde. So
Mm-hmm.
that brought up so much shit for me. And the person that I was in that relationship with for 3 years was white, obviously, because I shared the story about their mom. So I didn't realize that I was going through so much racial trauma in that relationship until afterwards. But it was like the icing on the cake that the person he was involved with was a skinny, tall white girl who was blonde and wore sundresses. And I was like, holy shit, like it is me. Like this, yeah, I was the problem, you know? Like it kind of
No, I
reinforced the
can't.
things that I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was processing that, plus that same person at the end of my experience assaulted me. So
So
processing that,
I'm sorry to hear
and
that.
yeah, it was it was very like it felt like it brought me backwards. Like it felt like again I was ingesting the things that were done to me and said to me and blaming it on myself and saying like my outside's good not good enough and so is my inside, like none of this is good enough. And so luckily going to grad school I was in a completely different environment and away from that. Um and I found that therapist and I just took my time and I tried doing dating apps and stuff like that cuz like I would go out, but honestly, I felt like I was invisible. I felt like I would enter a place and I wouldn't be looked at. Like I'd see the way people would look at my friends and I wouldn't get looked at like that. And it
Mm,
was interesting cuz my high school best friend, one day we were talking and she asked me, she was like, Ashley, when you walk, do you look up or down? And I was like, oh, I always look down at my feet. And she's like, why do you do that? And I was like, oh, because I'm clumsy, because I really am. And I was like, I'm not trying to bust my ass everywhere, but
yeah.
also like, I don't want to just like invite strangers to look at me. And because I mean, we're in New York, right? Like people, you look at someone and someone takes that as an invitation. So she was like, you know, all that time that you spend looking down, you also don't take the time out to realize the people that are looking at you, like the people that are
Mm,
taking that moment to like glance at you a little harder. And I was like, oh shit, that's real. So I tried to put more of an effort of putting myself out there. And then I had the weird experience where my age was an issue. Because of the experiences that I was going through, I was just like not finding that people around my age were what I was interested in. And yet the people that I was engaged with, once they found out my age, they were like, you're amazing, but like you're a baby.
oh,
And so it was like, okay. So I took it easy, you know, went on a couple dates, had some situations, whatever. But it wasn't until, yeah, this last 2 months that I'm in a relationship again. And
I mean,
I'm,
I'm not
yeah,
validating it, but I'm just
yeah,
yes.
no, I love it.
Sure.
Like I'm,
It's like the stages you've been through. I'm like, where?
it's a wild ass ride, really. It has been. And this person is absolutely amazing. They're non-binary, and I think honestly one of the biggest things is that they're fat too.
Yes.
Like they are Latinx, they're Mexican, they're tall as fuck, they're fat, and they're non-binary, and just a lot of the experiences we've had on our own, within our bodies, outside of our bodies, allows me to have this like comfort that I've literally never experienced with anyone. Because also at the same time, I realized that like a lot of my friends are not fat, and then the ones that are fat, we like we both know like it sucks the way that people treat us. But I
Mm.
had never been with someone that was not thin or white, which really sucks to say.
You've never
But
been with anyone who wasn't, who what, who, wow, wow,
yeah,
okay, wow.
so it's been such a like comfortable experience.
Yeah, that makes me happy to hear. And I'm wishing you and your boo all the love and success and the prosperity and all the good things. That makes me happy. Yeah, y- mm, I wouldn't say I have a similar journey, but I do think hearing your story, I feel some similarities. Like being fat, so much for me, it was just like I am fat, but I also know you want to fuck me, so stop lying to yourself. Like it's it was more so and I never really internalized a lot of the fat phobia. It does pop up occasionally, but for me, I don't know, like the desirability has. I'm so selfish. I'm always worried about my own desirability. Like, what do I desire, and I'm gonna go for that. Versus, how is that? Who is, what is others' sexual desires of me? But that, everyone's journey is different, and it's not easy. Being fetishized is a very real thing, and that to me is nasty. Like that to me is just as harmful. Being overtly sexualized and desired versus not being desired as well. It seems like fat bodies rarely do we experience or see. I think it happens, but it takes a while. But rarely do we see our fat bodies just being just loved on and appreciated just for existing and breathing and eating and knowing pleasure, wanting pleasure. So I thank you for that story, for your story. If you if you could talk to your 12-year-old self, what would you say?
Yeah, 12. Hmm. I think that that was a really pivotal time in terms of like that concept of like being fat, of being desirable, of being um ugly, right? As I said in the beginning, because puberty, right? Like puberty is hitting
That's why
12.
I picked 12. That's like that pre-puberty point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was just like, because I was fat, I was already wearing a bra. Like I was already, but I wasn't necessarily sexy or whatever the concept I was trying to, think that having this should be.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that 12 is very pivotal also because around 11 I had a really worrisome experience, or worrisome in the sense that it like upset me, where my mom was at the supermarket and I was like waiting at the corner for her to like come with the cart.
Mhm.
um and a woman had come up to me like really really like urgently and been like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry." And I was just like, "What is happening?" And basically the woman was just like, "Do you not have any parents? Like how could they let you get pregnant so early?"
Oh my God.
And so I
Oh
realized
my
that this woman
God.
was perceiving my body as being pregnant when I was just fat.
Yeah. Oh my
And
God.
so right?
What the fuck?
it, I was like, whoa. And that made me aware of like how I was standing, how I would, like my
Mhm. Just
physical. Yeah.
Get in. Mm-hmm.
So it just like added to this like cycle of like really terrible internalization, negative thinking. And honestly, like if I could speak to my 12-year-old self now, I would just let them know that like the part of you that hurts is also what leads you to the path that like fulfills you.
Mm.
Because I fucking love myself now and I fucking love what I do and I fucking love the people around me. And honestly, it felt like a lot of the days, these things, these internalizations, my mental illness, like they drained me, but they also inspired me to like dream because I was constantly thinking about, I don't want to be this, so what do I want to be? And honestly, I always wanted to like be one of those like cool, like dark haired, tattooed, like women.
Mm.
And now I'm like that, just not woman.
Yeah.
But like knowing that I'm self actualizing, which is another thing that, like, as a therapist, I talk a lot about is like self actualization and really becoming the you that you want to be. And knowing that there's a lot of barriers for that, but becoming the me that I wanted to be was like possible for me. And I did it and I put in that work. And now I think 12-year-old me would think I'm a boss ass bitch, honestly.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
What do you want to hear from your 60-year-old self?
60. Mm. So I think I would want to know, how do you survive the grief? Um, I think grief is an experience that I never thought I would have to experience in the way that I have. After losing my god brother and my godmother, it put me into this like terrible cycle. Because of my breakup being around that time, I entered this like tumultuous 2-year abusive situation with that person.
Mm.
And a lot of people on my campus, because it was small, they knew me as like the crazy ex-girlfriend. And I think that a big part of that was that people thought that my actions, the way that I was acting and the way that I was acting out, were because I was broken up with, or that our relationship ended. But it was the grief. It was like, holy shit, I just lost my brother. Holy shit, my mother is dying. My godmother is dying, who my godmother and my mother raised us together because they both had no shit husbands, like, So I grew up in this like matriarchy, and I couldn't deal with it because I didn't have the time to, because their deaths were in the summer. I had to go back to campus.
Mm.
And you really think a bunch of like horny, alcohol driven 20-year-olds are like making space for my feelings?
Yeah, that
No.
could, no.
So like I didn't know how to handle them. So I acted out and I did destructive behaviors, and like I never would have thought it would bring me to the place that I was, or allowed me to make the decisions that I did. And
Mhm.
so, um, obviously, as life continues, especially given the state of the world, we know that loss is continuous. And honestly, sometimes when I think about the people that I have, like, it's really morbid, but as a griever, you think, like, holy shit, which one of my friends is going to go first? Will I go before my friends? Will I go before my mom? Will she go first? Like, I don't know what preparing for that looks like, because you really can't,
Yeah.
even when the death is anticipated. Um, but yeah, I really can't foresee what grief looks like for me. But I've also been blessed to make a community of grievers through this like organization called the Dinner Party, where it's like a group of grievers that are in their 20s to 30s. They just come together at a dinner table and you just relate on your grief. And I met one of like my favorite people in the whole wide world there, my friend Marianne, who
Mm.
like also like photographs me. So they have helped me embrace my body in ways that I could never imagine, because they're a trauma informed boudoir photographer. So yeah, just how do you survive the grief? Um, and being gentle with myself.
Nice. If you could change your identity, would you? And in season 2, I started expanding this one to, I would really want to be like a sequoia tree or like a hummingbird, just anything. If you could change, would you?
Mm. Back in the day, I would have said 100% yes in my head. that I wouldn't have said that out loud.
Okay.
Honestly, I used to be one of those people that like I would cry myself to sleep and hope that I could wake up being a white woman.
Oh shit.
Like and it wasn't because I valued whiteness or because I like craved to fulfill that.
Because it seems easier to be.
Yeah. That's literally all I wanted was I wanted it to be easier. I wanted to wake up and it's okay if I'm still mentally ill because at least I'd have more resources. Or, it's okay if I'm fat because, my whiteness would still give me other privileges. Like I just wanted life to be easier. And now I'm like, fuck that. I'm cool as hell. I did all this shit because I did it myself. I had the support of like my mom and my friends, but like I love me as I am. But if I were to be manifested into something that isn't like a human body, um, hmm, I think my inclination is to say the ocean because that's my happy place.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's too powerful. Like
Is
that's
it?
too,
Is
I
it
feel
powerful?
the ocean does so much and is so vast that I'm like, like I think regular old me would be okay being like a winter sky. It's like my favorite color is like that pink sky before it snows. So
Mhm.
if I could have one night of being that sky, I'd be okay with that.
Ashley, I think you're powerful enough to be the ocean too, though. Just want to throw that
Thank
out there.
you. Thank you.
Is there anything that I didn't touch upon that you really want to express in this moment? Is my last question.
No, I feel like I shared a lot.
Yes.
A lot. But thank you so much for like allowing me to share this space with you and giving me this space to be this open.
Thank you. Thank you. Black Queer Alive is meant for these moments. Um, I just want it's like I don't know. I feel like it's it's an archival project. I just want to hear from as many people as possible and connect and learn because there's so much, I think sometimes as black and queer people, we get into our own constructs of blackness and queerness and what that looks like for us, and this is what empowers me, and this is how, this is the armor I'm going to put on. But I think I'm just so interested in it, in black and queer being so many things.
Mhm.
And in order for me to even discover that, I have to be open and vulnerable, radically vulnerable, to perspectives that are unlike my own. So thank you for adding to this beautiful project. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty, I'm gonna stop this right here.